During the 16th century in Istanbul's Ottoman Empire, women inside Topkapı Palace lived within a rigid imperial harem hierarchy. A favored concubine could wake to servants gone, doors closed, and the terrifying realization that the Sultan wanted someone else. That rejection usually did not mean instant execution. More often, it meant losing access, status, income, or the one thing that could transform an enslaved palace woman into somebody powerful: the Sultan's attention. She might remain in service, be transferred elsewhere, or eventually be manumitted and leave the palace. But if she had a son, enemies, or political influence, losing her position could become much more dangerous. And here's the first ugly fact: most women in the imperial harem were not glamorous royal lovers. They were enslaved palace workers. Women entered through purchase, gifts, or captivity, were trained in Ottoman court culture, and were placed inside a strict hierarchy. Only a small minority were directly connected to the Sultan as consorts. The rest cleaned, washed clothing, served households, maintained rooms, learned crafts, or performed other palace duties. So imagine the psychological trap. You're inside one of the most powerful households on earth. Your old family may be gone from your life. Your status, income, clothes, living space, and future depend heavily on rank. Then one day the ruler notices you. Suddenly everything can change. A woman who became one of the Sultan's consorts could rise far above ordinary palace servants. Rank affected stipends and privileges, and producing a prince could tie a woman directly to the future of the dynasty. The palace that had treated her as one servant among many could begin treating her as somebody politically important. Yeah, that sounds like winning until you remember what the prize actually was. Because favor was personal, unstable, and competitive. The Sultan could simply stop showing interest. Another woman could become more important. A child could die. A prince could fall from favor. And the entire little world built around you could start collapsing. That is basically what happened to Mahidevran, one of the best-known women in Suleiman the Magnificent's household. She was the mother of Prince Mustafa and had once held an important position before Hürrem became Suleiman's dominant consort. Mustafa was not some irrelevant child hidden in a nursery. He became a serious contender for the throne. Then Hürrem rose. Suleiman formed an extraordinary relationship with her, fathered several children with her, eventually married her, and broke earlier Ottoman dynastic patterns in the process. Mahidevran's position weakened as Hürrem's grew, but Mahidevran still had one enormous source of power: Mustafa. Under Ottoman dynastic practice, a prince's mother could accompany him when he went out to govern a province. Her political future became tied to his. If her son eventually became sultan, she could become the Valid Sultan, the sultan's mother, and potentially the most powerful woman in the imperial household. If he failed, well, there wasn't exactly a comfortable retirement plan guaranteed. In 1553, the nightmare arrived. Mustafa came to his father's military camp after being summoned. He entered Suleiman's tent and was attacked by executioners. He resisted, but he was strangled on his father's orders. His corpse was then displayed outside the imperial tent. Jesus. Now think about Mahidevran. The man who had once favored her had just ordered the killing of their son. Whatever hope she had of becoming the mother of the next sultan vanished in minutes. Mustafa's political future was erased, his household collapsed, and Mahidevran followed her dead son to Bursa, where he was buried. Her later life was not the jeweled retirement people imagine. When they hear the word harem, she fell into financial difficulty. Accounts describe her struggling with debts and even being unable to pay the rent on her house. Years later, under Selim's son, Hürrem's own son, her circumstances finally improved. Her debts were settled, a house was provided, and she again had enough financial security to support the maintenance of Mustafa's tomb. That's one of the cruelest parts of this system. A woman could spend years near the center of imperial power, raise a possible future sultan, and still end up dependent on the mercy of the branch of the family that defeated hers. palace jobs security. But Mahidevran's story was extreme because she was attached to a prince. For many lower-ranking women, being unwanted was quieter. No guards burst in, no executioner appeared. Nobody dramatically screamed your name across a marble courtyard. You simply stopped moving upward. A woman who never became one of the Sultan's consorts could remain in palace service for years. And the harem was also a training institution. Women learned court etiquette, religion, sewing, embroidery, music, household administration, and other skills according to their roles. Many palace slaves were eventually manumitted and left the imperial household. And here's the part that completely destroys the usual movie version of the harem. For many women, leaving was normal. The vast majority of the manumitted female palace slaves, studied in surviving records, later married. Their relationship with the imperial court could even continue after they left, through patronage, family ties, money, and connections. So rejection could actually end in something far less cinematic than murder. Freedom and marriage. But don't mistake that for a modern dating rejection. These women had entered the system as slaves. Their service, movements, rank, and economic lives were controlled by an imperial household. Some had been purchased, some had been presented as gifts, others had entered through captivity. The fact that many were later freed does not magically make the institution gentle. And status could disappear fast when a reign changed. The accession of a new sultan could lead to women from the previous household being manumitted or moved out, while others were transferred to places such as Istanbul's Old Palace. Losing physical access to the reigning sultan meant losing proximity to the center of imperial power. That separation could be devastating for a woman whose identity had been built around access. The doors don't need chains if the person who matters is now behind another set of doors. And then there was the truly dangerous level, when a harem woman became politically powerful enough that rivals stopped seeing her as a discarded consort and started seeing her as a threat. Kösem Sultan shows how dark that could become. She had been a consort of Ahmed VI, then became valid sultan and a central political force during the reigns of her sons and grandson. By 1651, she was locked in a struggle with Hürrem Sultan, mother of the young Mehmed IV. This was no longer about romance, it was about control of the empire. Hürrem's faction moved against Kösem inside Topkapı Palace. Kösem was attacked in her quarters and strangled during the coup in 1651. A woman who had survived multiple reigns and decades of court politics finally died inside the same closed world that had made her powerful. That wasn't the normal fate of a woman who lost a sultan's interest. It was the worst evolution of the same system. Favor created rank, rank created connections, connections created political power, and political power could make somebody decide you needed to disappear. So what happened to women the sultan rejected? Usually, they were not thrown into the Bosporus, secretly drowned in sacks, or automatically executed because a ruler got bored. That image is far closer to sensational harem mythology than to the ordinary machinery revealed by palace records. The real answer is colder. Some remained servants. Some stopped rising through the hierarchy. Some were transferred away from the political center. Many palace slaves were eventually freed and married. Women with princes could watch their fate rise or collapse with that son, and women who became major political actors could face ruin, or, in violent palace struggles, death. Mahidevran may be the clearest image of what losing a sultan's favor could really mean. Once, she had stood close to Suleiman and raised a son who might inherit an empire. Then that son entered his father's tent and never walked out alive. Years later, Mustafa lay in a tomb at Bursa, while his mother lived far from the palace that had once placed the Ottoman throne almost within her reach. No dramatic dungeon, no fairy tale ending, just a closed door in Istanbul, a grave in Bursa, and a woman who lived long enough to understand exactly how temporary a sultan's favor could be.